At Daddy's funeral, the preacher used a verse from Acts in which he said, he served his generation well, and then he fell asleep. And I remember thinking how appropriate that was to describe Daddy's life. And I think that everybody, the family, Daddy's neighbors, his co-workers, would have agreed that Daddy had spent much of his life serving other people. He and Mama were married for 70 years. And during that time, he truly did serve Mama. She never learned to drive, so he drove her everywhere she went, to doctor's appointments, to the mall, to the stores. He, once he was no longer working, he washed dishes and mopped floors. Not always the way she wanted it done, maybe, but he definitely acted as a servant to her in many ways, in the best sense of the word. And it wasn't just her, it was all of us. He was 70-something years old, up at Brenda's cutting down trees with Norman. He'd get a phone call from the church saying the heater wasn't working. Off he'd go to the church. Aunt Susie would call and say the washing machine was leaking water, and he'd go fix it. That was Daddy. And it wasn't just people that he knew. I remember several times growing up, him running out the door and Mama running behind him going, "Don't drive too fast," because the hospital, the little local hospital, had called and said somebody had been in an accident or somebody was bleeding and they needed blood. And Daddy would make that 20-minute trip in less than 15 minutes, ignoring Mama telling him not to drive too fast, and hold out his arm and say, "Take as much as you need or as much as you can." And there are a lot of people, there are people alive today in Choctaw County because Daddy freely donated his own negative blood whenever it was needed. And yet Daddy didn't see anything special about any of that. He was a very humble man, and he never saw any of those things that he did as anything out of the ordinary. To him, he was just trying to be a good man. And he didn't recognize that all of those things that he did for his entire life were out of the ordinary things, that they were a reason for pride. The one thing that Daddy was very proud of, and that he talked about with pride, was his time in the Navy during World War II. He felt like he had done something important. He had been a part of something important, not just for the United States, but for the entire world. Daddy wasn't an educated man. He said he graduated from the 6th grade. Now, Mama said he didn't really. They just told him not to come back because he was just too old. But he probably could not have even found some of those countries on the map when he left to go into the Navy. He was barely a man. He was a little over, he was just barely 18. And he might not have even been able to find those places on the map. He might not have even really understood a lot of what was going on. But what he did know, I think, was that there was a fight against evil. And he knew that people had to stand up. And it was a sacrifice. They made a sacrifice. He was a young married. They had gotten married in March, and so he left just a few months after they got married. Daddy had barely, I mean, he might have been in the state of Alabama and Mississippi, never been out of those states, never been anywhere, and yet he just left. And he went to all these places, and he dealt with all these situations, and it had to have been hard. He felt that he and his generation, he would have called them boys. He would have said, yeah, me and a lot of other boys sacrificed. And he freely admitted that a lot of people had sacrificed way more than he did. I mean, Daddy was not wounded, and he came back. A lot of them didn't. And he never forgot that. But he felt they had sacrificed a lot to stop the spread of something evil and to keep the United States free from oppression. when he talked about this, he did not speak about this in a conceited way or look what I did. It was with a gratitude that he had been able to participate, to serve. Again, it was like he was proud that he had been able to serve. And he taught us, this experience, I think, greatly influenced him for the rest of his life. And it influenced what he taught us. He taught us to respect this country. He taught us to appreciate this country and the opportunities that it gave us, that we could choose our own path, that we were in charge of our own destinies. I don't know if Daddy would have used the word destiny, but that's what he meant, that, you know, here in this country, you had choices and your life was pretty much up to you. And he appreciated that because he had come through a time when, if things had turned out differently, we might not have had those opportunities. He taught us to be thankful for the freedom that we had. And I realize that today it's a little bit out of fashion, but he taught us to respect the flag. Because to him, it wasn't just a symbol of the country. It was a symbol of the boys and the women who had made sacrifices so that this country could continue to be a place of freedom. He taught us to respect the uniform. He taught us to respect the men and the women who wore the uniform because he understood the sacrifices those people were making. So when Daddy got to the end of his life and he knew he was dying, the preacher asked him what did he want at his funeral. And Daddy, being Daddy, just said, well, keep it short. But do mention that I was a World War II veteran. So even at the end of his life, that was still something he was immensely proud of. And that was really, he said, and put that on my tombstone. He wanted the dates of his service on his tombstone. So at Daddy's funeral, Clint was there in his dress uniform and saluted as the military were doing the gun salute. And I realized how much Clint reminded me of Daddy. He had that same stance that Daddy had. He stood the way Daddy stood. And I thought, you know, how proud Daddy was of Clint. And I thought, you know, I think that the lessons have been learned. And we are carrying on what Daddy would have wanted us to carry on. So what you're going to see in these videos are some clips, old clips, of Daddy talking a few different times where he's talking about his experiences in the Navy, and hopefully you'll enjoy seeing Granddaddy talk about what it was like during that time.
March 31st, 44, and he went to the Navy in November.
So you were together for about 6 months?
And
Where did you all live?
with Mom and Pop.
You all had a little place, they all have do you live in their house or did you have a little side?
He lived in the house with him. And then he had to go to the Navy and I stayed with them. And then he got to come back in December.
You left in November and came back in December?
For boot leave.
Oh, okay.
I went to Great Lakes, Illinois.
It was just for training.
For training, yeah.
And that was the last time I saw him until he was back to stay, which was 15 months.
So what was it like being by yourself? You get to hear much from him while he was off?
Well, just through letters.
You got letters regularly?
Well, all along, I wrote to him about every day, but now maybe I'd get 2 or 3 letters from him, or 3 or 4 in maybe one day, but they'd be wrote maybe a month. The time I'd get them, he'd send them our mail, but they still it wasn't news, you know.
Well, could he tell you much of anything anyway while he was off?
No, couldn't. If he did, they cut it out.
Somebody read your letters?
Oh yeah, they censored the
I
mail.
censored all the mail.
All of the
Yeah,
mail
I
coming
ignored mail.
out.
But now, if I had there's one thing, we wasn't very wise back in that day. A lot of my duty was stateside duty.
And
Meaning
I didn't know it.
In Hawaii?
She didn't know, yeah.
And you didn't know where he
No,
was?
he would come to California. And why he didn't send me a letter from there and tell me where he was and what he was doing beats me.
I didn't know.
You could have just stuck one in a
We
post
went
office
out to the
box.
USO, the USO and YMCA buildings like that for servicemen. They had writing rooms, they had everything. But I don't know why. I mean, I really don't know why.
Well, were you told not to though?
Well, we was told not to. We wasn't supposed to do it. But I bet you every man on those ships did, your daddy. And if all I'd have had to do was sat down and wrote her a letter and dropped it in the post in a box, mailbox, and it would have went on. But I didn't know to do it. I mean, it never crossed my mind that I should do that and tell her where I was at.
Through the mail, I got a package, a little package from you, and it had on there, what was that? Was it a cushion cover or what? And it had California on it, and I wondered if he was in California, you know.
You sent her a package?
It was something, it might have just been in a large envelope, I don't know.
I sent you
forgot.
some kind of little pillow cover or something.
I think it was a little pillow cover, and it had something.
But talking about being in service then, we're looking at right there now. Of course, that wheel behind me, Heyward wheel behind me was just a background. It was the picture itself, it was not for real. And this picture was taken while I was in boot camp, not long after I was in boot camp. And I got my boots at Great Lakes, Illinois, which was very cold. I'd never seen any weather that cold. I went up there, and at one time it was 18 below zero during the time that I was there, so that was pretty cold for me.
Was boot camp rough?
No, boot camp was not that rough. The biggest thing on going through a boot camp in the Navy was staying neat, clean, and keeping whatever around you was clean. We was in new barracks, and those barracks, we had to clean the floor every so often. It was white pine, I think, white pine. Might have been hardwood. But we cleaned that floor with steel wool from time to time, and we had our clothes and everything had to be neat. And we shaved every morning, whether we needed to shave or not. A lot of us wasn't but just kids. But we were told that we might could shave at night and get by with it, but most of us had to shave in the mornings. And to stay clean. I mean, to stay real neat and nice. And our uniforms had to be neat. Now, the uniform that I got on there now, as a dress uniform, of course, and we wore that dress uniform to get our picture made in, and the daily uniform, or the uniform of the day, it probably didn't have white stripes on it, the collar nor the sleeve. And talking about those stripes on that sleeve, there ain't one white stripe as you'll see on that sleeve. That was just an apprentice or whatever you'd call it. I mean, I just entered the
You
Navy.
just started, yeah.
Yeah.
So you weren't the admiral yet, huh?
No. So, but I went on and finally got another one on it, which was Seaman Second Class. And before that I come out of service, I finally made Seaman First Class, which I was still just seaman on deck. And but that's about all there. That brings us up to the time of coming out of boot camp there. Which is now, here's a picture here that I had made and sent back to Virginia. Probably I was in California at the time the picture was made. I don't know for sure. And but that's the only real good picture that I ever.
And you were about 18?
I was 18 at the time. I was not 19 yet, I don't imagine. And so I had that picture made somewhere in California and sent back to her. And I had already was out on my sea duty whenever that was done. And I've tried to take care of this picture down through the years a whole lot. And it's not because of the boy that's in the picture, really. It's because of the uniform a lot. It is because of the, I had a chance to wear the United States Navy's uniform
And you were able to serve your country.
and be able to serve my country and do what little bit that I could for the country. And I didn't stay in service long. And but the time that I stayed in service was not bad. I was taken well care of in all manner, all respect, and I've got no kick at the way I was treated whenever I was in the Navy. But that is the picture that you're looking at there. I guess the best thing that was made of me while I was in the Navy. And
that was Granny's, I guess that was Granny's favorite picture, huh?
yeah, I sent that to her when I was in California, and we tried to take care of it from then to now. So I kind of want that one to stay around for our younger people, grandchildren and all, to see the people, to see the picture. After my boots in Great Lakes, Illinois, I come home on a short leave. And I'll be 14 or 15 days leave. And we had a good time while I was home. Everything worked real good. We had a good time. I remember it was warm because I wore dungarees and just a thin shirt. We wore dungarees and blue denim, blue chamois shirts. That was our work clothes in the Navy. But if I went out,
you didn't wear those dress suits much.
well, if I went out anywhere, I wore the dress uniform. But if it was around home or on board ship or wherever, we wore those dungarees and blue chamois shirts. That was our work clothes. And but I got out of boots at Great Lakes, Illinois, come home on boot leave and went back to Great Lakes. And they put us on a train, some of them called old cattle train, but it had been reworked and it had bumps in it. And I forget how many of us was on it. They sent down. It took better than 300 men for a crew on the ship. And they sent us to Florida, to Tampa, Florida. That's where the ship was at. And whenever I got down there and saw that thing, tied up to the docks, you can't tell a lot about the paint here, but that thing was painted with big black and green stripes, not along the side of the ship, but it was painted in an angling shape up and down the side. And it was a brand new ship and it was beautiful. And I went on that thing and the inside of it was never been used, and it was real spick and span and clean. And it was a modern ship too. I had been on another ship at one time for a few days before that, and it was sort of an old ship, some kind of a freighter or something or another. But
what type of ship was yours?
this was an LSV, and on this ship,
What's an LSV?
yeah, it's a landing ship vehicle.
Oh, okay.
And if you notice, if you can see it well enough to tell, the back of this ship let down, and it was a real huge big ramp when you let the back of it down, even with the water. And our vehicles and things unloaded back there. And we could carry, I don't know how many, but several times as much as the LST could carry. But we had one disadvantage with the big ship. We could not get into shore. We had to stop out in deep water and unload whatever that we had back there. Usually we had something that would go on water or either land, called amphibious ducks or alligators or something like that. And but I got on that thing, and I had never been on a ship just that one time before then for a few days when I was on that freighter. Down in Tampa, Florida, They took them tugboats and pulled us out of there. Pulled us out in clear open water, turned us loose, and we was gone.
You were gone, huh?
We was gone. And
Were you all well trained when you all left?
well, we had what little boot camp training that we had. We was not trained
You only had a few weeks of it.
only a few weeks, and we were not trained for the sea. Some of us had only been on the sea for just maybe 5 days.
And you were one of them?
I was one of those greens. But of course, there was enough of the crew on there that was old.
So you had a mix.
Huh?
You had a mix of experience.
Yeah, it was sort of mixed up, but we had enough of men on there that knew what they was doing to keep everything going. And we went by Louisiana. We went up through Louisiana and into the Mississippi River somewhere. I don't forgot exactly how all that was arranged. But we went to New Orleans, Louisiana to load ammunition. And Virginia come down there, but I called her and told somebody up here, called somebody and told them, tell her where I was at. She come down, but they wouldn't let me off board ship, except just down on the dock. So I didn't even get to see her when she come all the way to New Orleans, which was awful. But anyway, we loaded up there the next day and we left there. We made a few stops somewhere along the line, and we went on up and went through the Panama Canal. And but we wound up back in California, San Francisco, I think. And we made about 5 or 6 trips from San Francisco, Los Angeles, and one from Richmond, California. From there to the Hawaiian Islands. And why we carried our loads of material, vehicles and things and men and unload them at Heyward Islands, I guess most of it at Pearl Harbor. I never did really know, because I know they reloaded it on something and carried it on overseas. And but we operated kind of different from a lot of the ships anyway. There was only 6 of these ships that were made during the war or at any time, unless there was more made after they made the 6th one during World War II. And we could actually do the speed, I guess, of a lot of destroyers and escort ships. And so there was never an escort sent with us whenever we was on that duty from California to Hawaiian Islands. Well, I guess you could call that really in a way stateside duty, but we got overseas duty for it. And we stayed at that probably 6 months or so. But there's some of the things that I think of, I think back over a lot of times that makes me feel good, and some of them it's kind of sad. Our duty was to bring back men that had been over there in the foreign countries, and wherever we went, we loaded up a shipload of them and brought them back to the States. And going on over there with the load that we carried over, it didn't seem just like it did in a way with the ones we brought back. Because with the men that we brought back, some of them had been over there for years. And they had been in fighting zones too. And they would have the decks lined way before that we would get to inside of land. They'd be looking for the very first sight of America, of their own land that they had left some years ago. And that was kind of sad in a way to see them watching like that, but yet it made us feel good to know that
it made a big effect on you.
right, that we was bringing somebody back that really appreciated coming back. I can remember they had a big sign up on the end of the big warehouses on the dry dock. I believe the sign read, "Welcome home, well done," or either "well done, welcome home," one or the other, whichever it meant the same thing. And I can remember I was playing a big band out on the dock for the boys that we was bringing back in. And all sort of stuff like that. Now, I never did really see any action. Because after this duty was over that we done from Heyward Island back to California, we was actually in California the night that the Japanese fell. And I won't ever forget it.
An exciting time.
It was a really exciting time. I was down in the head, in the bathroom, I guess I should say. And best I remember, I was washing a blue uniform in a hand tub there. And whenever the word was passed, and so I left, I went out up the deck, main deck and all. I don't remember exactly how it all seemed, but it seemed like maybe a lot of the ships were blowing big whistles and things. Of course, I know there was a lot of happy people when those Japanese finally fell.
You had been out there for what, a year and a half almost?
Yeah.
So you've been out for quite a while, so I guess you were real happy too.
Yeah, I was happy, but now I had the advantage of a lot of fellas, which I don't say boasting, not at all, because if I had been put in and sent to the front to a battle zone, I wouldn't have done one bit. I would have went on and done it. But I wound up with this job on this ship and complete the safe waters. And so I stayed there until the war was over. But we had a load of stuff loaded up on the ship the night that they said the war was over. And I guess we must have been waiting for the orders as to where we was to go. And of course, on a ship of that size and a crew of that size, the personnel never get word as to what we was going to do next or where we was going. We pushed out of that thing, I think it was that next day, and headed for Japan.
That must have been a surprise when you got there.
Yeah, it was. Now, we knew we was headed
Oh,
for
you knew you were
Japan
going.
after we got out to sea. And that's the first time that I had ever been on a ship with a convoy of ships. And it was ships as far as I could see on either side. And of course, we were supposed to work with that convoy, but we could have left them on the modern ship that I was on. We could have went on off and left all of them except maybe the destroyers and escort ships. But then we were supposed to work with the 20-something, I believe it was 20-something loads of stuff. And we went on into Japan. And you know, it was kind of exciting after all to get there. I remember it took us several days to get there. I don't remember how long. We went into a place in Japan. It's hard to remember them names. They're hard to pronounce them. I think we went into a place that was called Sasebo. S-A-S-E-B-O is where we spelled that thing, I think. And at the time we got there, there was only one little tiny ship. It was tied up there somewhere close to the port. But this gave me a way actually to see the way the operation would have been done if it was actually in wartime. We pulled in and dropped anchor way back out from land, and every ship that had vehicles that could go on land or water, they was drove out into the water in formation. And all the boats that the ships carried to haul the men ashore on was put out, and everything was in formation. I mean, it was exact for miles and miles, far as we could see, I guess. And we had been watching land, and of course the Japanese up on in the place where we had come up to, they signaled us with lights, giving us messages. I couldn't read them, but the boys that could read lights could. And they told us we was welcome to our home nation. Come on in, you know, do what we wanted to. So we watched the boys as they hit the water in their boats and all those other vehicles and things. And we watched them going for the shore and up into the woods. And you know, I wondered about that sometime. If it had been during a wartime, they would have been facing bullets, airplane raids. Every kind of gun that could be aimed and every ship that could be set up and aimed at us would have been fired. And I never saw anything like that in life. But for the boys that did see it, I know that it was rough. And that's what makes me, even today, look up to a service person. In my way of thinking, they're great people. And I wasn't much because I didn't do much. And but you know, talking about service.
But you were away from your home for a year and a half. I mean,
Well, pretty close to
that
you.
was a big sacrifice. And
Yeah,
after the
well,
war was over, it wasn't over for you,
That's
was
right.
it?
No,
You had to stay on.
That's right. Whenever,
So you made a big sacrifice too,
yeah,
of course.
I did. And of course, I'm happy that
I
I
hope
was
you're
able
proud of it too.
to do that. We was actually what we done. We got in there and got everything unloaded. Then they took the big crews off of those big ships and split them up into small crews, just enough to man some of the stuff that was over there, some of the ships and things that was already over there. And I wound up on a small ship, on PCER. And that PCER was a Pacific Control Escort Rescue, is really what we was on. That's all. There you go. And so I don't know what happened to the big nice ship after that, but I had spent my time on it and I enjoyed it. But you know, that thing had telephones on it from one compartment to the other. We could just pick up the phone and ring the compartment down on the other end of the ship and talk to whoever we wanted to talk to. And we're talking about telephones, though. I was a telephone man on a small machine gun. Talking about our guns and things, this small machine gun that we're looking at here now, and a fellow by the name of Morris. And that's one thing I'm not lucky enough to remember a lot of names. But this is a 20 millimeter machine gun that he's on here. And of course you stand on the deck with your shoulders tied up to it and something like a seat belt around your back to hold you to the gun when you're firing, because it's going to shake you pretty bad, even if it is made into the deck, bolted to the deck. And these guns had modern sights on them. In that day, it was modern. Of course, I imagine it'd be a lot different now. And I was the man that was supposed to set the sights as we was beginning to, if we had been in action and we'd been in an air raid, I was supposed to spot the plane as quick as I could. Of course, the gunner was too. And I was supposed to bring the sights in and have them, if I figured the plane was 600 yards or 800 yards or whatever it was, I was supposed to guess it that best I could and set the sight on whatever yards I figured it was, and that gave the gunner a better chance to get the target into the cross on the sight. And I also had, I wore a set of sound-powered telephones on my head, and I had the phone on each ear and had another piece strapped around my chest for the breastpiece. But anyway, that's only a small gun of what we had on there. We had a pretty good bunch of guns on that ship, but we was not armed nearly as much as we would have been if we'd have been a cruiser or something like that. I guess that's about all I know to say about the small machine guns. Got lights and sending light signals. The light you see in this picture here now is, I don't know how far it could be seen, or how strong it really was, but you could see the thing for miles and miles and even more miles. And the man standing by it, I forgot what his rate or whatever it was that he was called, but he was a signal man. He was in the signal corps, and he was always the man, him or one that was about like him, that knew about the same amount of stuff he did about those things. There was one that received light messages and sent light messages from one ship to another one. But talking about coming back home, after got all the duty done on that other ship, big ship and everything, got back on these little ones, we had some stuff over there that we had to do before we come back. We had to go out and clean up some minefields. I know you probably heard a lot of talk about the Japanese and whoever over there laying out minefields and hoping our ships would get tangled up in them and get blown up. Well, I don't know how successful they was in blowing up many. I didn't hear about many getting blown up, if any. And but anyway, it was our duty. We was sort of occupational force, I guess. And whenever I was transported on to this small ship, we went out into these minefields, us and, again, it was a convoy of small ships. And every ship knew its duty. We went out into these minefields, and we tore these mines out. The way they do that, they take a paravane and drop a paravane over the side. It go way below the bottom of the ship. These small ships you use for such as this, they're almost flat bottom. So they are really rough in rough water. And but we worked at that for a while, I guess, and done whatever we were supposed to do about cleaning up that area. And we was, I don't even remember the part of the year or whatever. But anyway, that was the ending up of the war and everything over there, except the boys that was really going to stay and occupy the place. And we were ready to come back home. But we got on, whenever they was through with us, we headed that thing back toward America. And it was us and another small ship, about the same type ship. And we were going to make the trip together. And somewhere or another out there, that other ship, his smokestack blew into. And so there wasn't nothing to do but for us to tie on with that ship.
It must have slowed you up quite a bit.
Yeah, we wasn't making it about 13 knots in the beginning. 14 at the most with that little ship. It was wore out. It had been used hard. And it was wore out. But to come from 23 knots down to 14 was a lot of difference. 23 over the big one, we could do 23. And come down to about 14. But anyway, the one that we were traveling with blew a smokestack, and we had to tie on to that ship. We let out a long cable from over the rear end and hooked onto it. And I think we towed him for probably a couple of days, I'm not sure. But whenever they got their smokestack repaired, well, they could get back on their own power. They got loose from us. And you know, it's so hard to remember all the days and things. Just remember a little something pop up here and there about times like that, like that. But I remember we left Tampa, Florida when we left here. And we come back to Key West, Florida. And we come back to Key West, Florida, and we docked that thing there. And I don't know why, but they put that thing in dry dock, that small ship, and raised it above water. And I guess for something for us to do. I don't never know why they decided to do that. But they raised that thing above the water in that dry dock, and they put us to chipping the bottom of it.
Shipping, what do you mean, shipping it?
Chipping the bottom of it. They said they're gonna repaint it, gonna redo it,
Oh, okay.
and all. But I didn't ever remember the chipping done. You know, that thing may not have ever been fired up again after we left it. It was probably let down years after then, or whenever they needed it out and towed off to some junkyard, because it had been used, look back through most of the World War II. And
So that was the end of your military
that was
career?
about the end of it. After that, I was turned loose and sent out to New Orleans to get discharged. That's where we got our ruptured duck sewed on. And it was a little bitty insignia thing and sewed up on the jacket like a duck. We called it ruptured duck.
Ruptured duck.
That meant we was heading for our discharge.